Hi folks, welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Been silent for a while now. Since my last podcast, which you are still able to view on YouTube, I did another podcast that was canceled and removed and earned me a strike for what they said was something like medical disinformation. Even though I made no medical recommendations, I didn't talk about medicine at all. As a matter of fact, I was talking about our spiritual history, which apparently they felt was too closely tied to what's going on in current history to be allowed to persist. At any rate, I took that episode and I put it on my Google Drive, so as long as they don't censor my own Google space, you'll be able to get it there. I put the link to it in the comment section of my channel. And today I'm going to talk about that incident. I've already kind of talked about it and how it applies to what all of us is going through right now, as we are challenged with how to react to the events of the day. Let's see, this may be a little bit loud now. Let me just shove it down a bit. Okay, so I'm going to call this talk Free Speech, Free Will, and Their Bearing on the Karma of Victims, Martyrs, Partisans, and Combatants. Okay, free speech is a much discussed term right now, and many have different ways of defining it and redefining it and trying to classify what is speech that should be free and what is speech that should be taxed or punished. And this is a matter of some debate now. The other very hotly debated topic is around free will. You've basically got a large number of people who espouse the atheist point of view that there is no free will. We live in a materialist universe where everything obeys a rule, everything is programmed to be the way it is. And in fact, many people of that persuasion say, well, it's all programmed, and it's like the movie The Matrix. It's being programmed by some evil power that wants to make us suffer and milk our spiritual energies. And that's quite a popular conspiracy theory these days. In fact, it's one that's actively being promoted by the powers, oddly enough, who would love to have any misdirection of anger and angst pointed in anything but their own direction. And this is kind of the nature of the beast, isn't it? The top level of the beast, if you will. Okay, now, if you listen to my channel very much at all, you will know that it is my contention, yet yes, we do live in a simulation. In fact, the multiverse is a whole range of simulations which have resulted from a plan that the first conscious soul, God, if you will, came up with to provide a mechanism, a means for himself and other souls to perfect themselves, to test their ideas, see what things worked, what things didn't. And in the process of testing those ideas, basically sort out souls into universes of like-minded souls whose idea of perfection wasn't necessarily better or worse than another, it was just different. Okay, this is another of the core principles of the, I like to call it a religion, I think it's more honest, onism that I preach. That is that the ultimate way of respecting somebody else is to agree to disagree, not to accept their position, not to accept that they are right when you have a strong feeling that they are wrong. At the same time, not to keep pushing the issue to the point of open conflict, which solves nothing. Karmically, if you kill your opponent, you don't win the war. You create a karmic debt, which is going to haunt you forever. This is the nature of karma. So an omnist is honest enough to admit when, okay, I still have a strong feeling, you have a strong feeling, we have not been able through rational argument to put aside each other's feelings, to convert the other to our way of thinking. Therefore, we should agree to disagree and amicably shake hands and move on with other things that may be more important than arguing over how many angels you can fit on the head of a pin, or a pinhead, as it were. And this is kind of the nature of what I believe is getting along with folks without going along with them, if you know what I mean. Okay, so we're really challenged with this right now on a number of levels. Basically, the world has become a very connected place through the internet, with social media, with the reach of well-funded and well-marketed and proselytized messages getting out to the world. It's becoming more and more difficult to discern what is pure propaganda from what is truth. In fact, it's become more important to those creators of news to sell propaganda than to sell truth. And in fact, we are experiencing in the Ukraine-Russia conflict the first conflict that really is more about propaganda than truth, from both sides, from all sides of this event, which, it is my opinion, is a proxy war. If you don't know what a proxy war is, it is basically a war fought by, basically driven by two sides that actually both want the war. They want this to happen because it serves their agenda. Sometimes they have a common agenda, sometimes they have conflicting agendas, and this proxy conflict is a way of pursuing their agenda without open conflict between the partisans, the people that are actually behind the war. And this makes them very complex affairs, because you can't just force other countries to go to war, a war that probably isn't in their best interest, or the best interests of their people. So they've got to have their own propaganda narrative to sell it, especially if you're the aggressor in the war, which, you know, becomes a whole nother dimension of war making. Who is the aggressor? That's where we get into the Gulf of Tonkin incidents, the Remember the Maine incident. There are many, many such events that have precipitated war. The assassination of Archduke Ferdinand that began World War I. Goes on and on and on, not only with wars, but with social upheaval, revolutions, reformations. These are political events far more than they are anything else. And this is why you can't really talk about religion without talking about politics, because Religion is about spiritual power. Spiritual power, anything on the spiritual side has a manifestation on the material side. And you cannot separate spiritual power from material power. Spiritual power is kind of the root of all other powers that manifest in physical ways, as electromagnetism, as sound energy, so forth. Also manifests itself as ideas that motivate people to start revolutions, to start wars. These are all rooted in what are essentially spiritual events, because as I tell you, and which you can prove to yourself, this is pretty much a no-brainer for anybody who steps back without an ego and thinks about it, that thought creates reality. There is nothing you can observe around you that was not the result of a thought. Now, thoughts don't have to be conscious. They can be unconscious, and much that happens around you is unconscious thought. It is programming. That is what unconscious thought is. It's programming. When you do something unconsciously, when something happens without any effort, it's because it was already programmed to happen that way. And this is why, especially once we learned about quantum effects in physics, that you cannot really come to any other conclusion than that, okay, if you can't predict exactly what's going to happen in a situation, that's because it is not predetermined. There is a probability it will happen based upon the average behavior of the things you're looking at. Now, you can apply that average behavior to different things, not just elementary particles. You can apply it to people. And this essentially is the art of mass psychology. This is the art of propaganda. How can I manipulate people with their thoughts to get the outcome I want? This is a spiritual process. Most of the time it's used for very selfish and evil purposes, I think you'll agree, but it is rooted in spirituality. And this is why one of the darkest poles of spirituality you can fall into is this one that says, well, it's all one, there's no evil, it's all good, it's all love, we don't understand, love is everything. This is the result of a psyop. If you believe that, you have been programmed. You have been programmed so effectively that your worldview is based upon a completely nonsensical proposition. And this is a lot of what I do on my channel, is exposing nonsensical propositions which we base our worldview on, because this is why we have so much conflict. It all stems back to some very nonsensical ideas of truth. If you can't agree on something as fundamental as what or who God is, you got a big problem. Especially when you've got, the two primary camps in such a fundamental question being, well, God is the all-powerful, almighty ruler of the universe, can do anything, can make anything away, and he's the best friend of my church and me because I have a personal relationship with God. Okay, you've got that kind of folk on one hand, and you've got other folks on the other end saying, well, everything is just predetermined, it's all chemicals and interactions and forces of nature, and we aren't really thinking, we just think we're thinking. And everything is running according to the clockwork of nature. Where did nature come from? It just is. The speed of light just is. The Big Bang just was. Or there's still some people in that school that don't want to believe in a Big Bang. They think, well, it can't possibly have been like that because all processes have to be just like an accordion going back and forth, like the lungs going automatically and just out of our control, and we just have to go with the flow. And okay, this is a result of that other pole of nonsensical thinking about creation, about who God is. They're both equally in a very dark place that leads them to dark conclusions that cause conflict, unnecessary conflict, because they have a dogmatic idea of who God is. An entity they don't even know, never met, don't have the faintest clue what God is all about. They don't even know themselves very well, because essentially what they're doing with their ideas of God is creating God in their own image, because they love themselves. It is in the nature of beings to love themselves, to want to preserve their lives. This is one of the most fundamental programming pieces of any living creature, to want to sustain your life, live as long as possible, have as many children as possible. This is the natural programming of a beast, or a vegetable. The vegetables are just a little bit stealthy, more stealthy about how they go about it. There is absolutely no difference between animals and vegetables, other than the fact that the vegetables don't have legs and stuff to move them around. And they don't have the kind of structures that we associate with brains. They have a different solution for that. It's a distributed brain, distributed within the cells, the different kinds of cells within, which we all have too. This is another of the huge fallacies that everybody gets into that causes no end of problem, is thinking of anything as one indivisible entity. Your body is made up a lot of parts. You can separate some of those parts and your body will keep on functioning, maybe with more limited functionality. There's other pieces that it can't function without, and you will die. Okay? Understanding that nature of the whole applies not to individual bodies, human bodies, it applies to bodies of population, whole species, whole planets. They are a hierarchy of souls, some of whom have the same goals, some have different goals. Now, you can manipulate the whole by seeing how it reacts and learning how to control it. That is not the same as being God, because there's nothing to prevent any other higher conscious entity from trying to do the same thing. And this is the nature of reality, is that God is not all powerful. The first creator created things that became as great in creation as he did. Why is the first creator so special? Because it would be easy to create something that destroyed you. That's the mark of a bad creator. A creator that's not going to be successful, because whatever they create ends up destroying them. And this is the nature of authoritarian creators, those who dictate, those who want to control everything, those that want to stamp out anything that doesn't fit their version of perfection. That's proven time and again to be irresponsible creation. All it does is create more tension that wants to destroy your perfect empire, because no other soul's idea of perfection is exactly like yours. This is the huge fallacy of communism, that, oh, we got to do it for the greater good. Well, what is the greater good? Giving all my money to some lazy bastard in a city who doesn't want to work or won't move to where they can get work? Is that greater good? I don't think so. It doesn't seem like greater good to me. Or somebody in a city who's, stuck in a place that they've owned in their family for generations, going out of repair. The taxes are going up. They can barely make ends meet, paying higher and higher taxes, trying to get enough work and enough pay to pay that, and not being able to get out of there because nobody wants to buy this place unless they put, $500,000 into renovating it. And even then, it's in a bad neighborhood now, so who would want to buy it? You can see from both sides that there's not a clear one-size-fits-all solution, and that is what the powerful people in this world are trying to do. They think they know the answers, and they don't really care who they step on to get there, as long as they don't step on their best buddies and their best friends who go to these WF enclaves in Davos and wine and dine each other and pat each other on the back about how climate friendly they're being and how socially equitable they're being and blah, 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 blah. They've got a completely warped idea of what good is. It may make perfect sense to them and to the handful of people that benefit from their policies, but it's absolute nonsense to folks like farmers in Netherlands who are being told that they have a cap on the methane they can generate, so they can't have cows anymore. They can't have fertilizer anymore because fertilizer comes from hydrocarbon production, and they're basically being put out of business. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense for the European consumer, who is now going to be forced to be even more dependent on imported fruits and vegetables from countries that don't give a shit about all these regulations and rules, and just do what they need to do to grow things, even if it means growing them in soil that's been contaminated with all sorts of shit, which essentially is what all of China is. China is the most polluted place on the planet. I've been there, I've lived there, I've seen it. And the ones who suffer most are the Chinese people. They are paying for your laziness and your selfishness, thinking that all you've got to do is stop the use of hydrocarbons to solve all the world's problems. That's complete and utter nonsense, at least with the current technology of batteries and solar panels and all of these wonderful life-saving technologies. They all have a cost too. They all have a cost to produce in China. An environmental cost that is huge, a human cost that is huge. And you don't see it because it's hidden behind this great firewall, which has been hiding a lot of things, as we are finally finding out, those of you who haven't been actually noticing anything for the last 3 years. What I was telling you about, warning you about 3 years ago, is now public knowledge. Yes, there was a lab leak, maybe 2 lab leaks in China because of the way they do production there. You outsource something to China and they're going to try to do it at the cheapest cost and steal any technology they can in the process and use it for their own personal benefit. That's how China has always worked, because China has always been under an authoritarian dynasty where you wanted to hide everything from the emperor, get as much as you can, and get out of China. This is why there's so many Chinese people outside of China all around the world, because everybody wants to get out of an authoritarian dystopia. While they can, they want to make as much money as they can in the corrupt system, and then get their family out so they don't have to be raised in the same dystopian place. And this is what this elite bunch of morons wants to bring to the whole world, because they don't have to live in it. They love this 3-tiered system, which is like the old world order. The old world order, you had the church, which was above any censure because it was holy. And this is not just a Catholic church. This was how the Buddhists were structured. This is how the Hindu religion was structured. This is how the highest echelons of Islamic religion were structured. So say this is a Christian thing. You have this highest level that lends moral authority to everything through fake religion. You've got this middle level of administration, the nobles, the lords, the state-appointed administrators, blah, 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 that, you know, claim to be meritocrats and doing everything because they are so dedicated to serving the state. This is kind of the core of Confucianism. It's a complete bullshit. Complete bullshit religion. Virtue signaling, empty virtue signaling that has always hidden mass corruption. Those telling you that China, oh, it's such a wonderful civilization, it's been going for thousands of years. That's complete bullshit. There have been just as many gyrations, revolutions, counter-revolutions, huge wars, etc. in China as any other place. If you think it's this perfect place that has been ruled by enlightened people, you basically swallowed a whole shitload of propaganda. And that's the same propaganda that's been extended to the world now. They saw what was going on in China. They saw what was going on in India. And, you know, the still successful Orthodox Church of Russia, and thought, you know, we've got to get back to something like that. We've got to get back to where we can really control people. And control has to be through ideology. Now, religion has been discredited, so let's go anti-religion. This is where communism comes from. This is where postmodern thought comes from. Let's worship science. Let's worship meritocracy. This is not a new idea. This is essentially Confucianism rolled over again into a world-dominating ideology that says, oh, because we know more than you, because we have more degrees than you, because we get together at Davos and we talk about big things while we're sipping on our lattes and flying around in our Learjets, that we know better than you what to do with your world. Bullshit. Complete bullshit. And if you sign up for that, well, you get what you got for it. Well, let's delve into that. Kind of went off on the weeds a little bit there, but I think that sets up the tone for what I'm going to be talking about. Now, I talk a lot about in my show about karma. I tell you that karma is an actual soul, is a goddess whose AI versions, okay, and for a little bit of review, the multiverse, a bunch of universes, has a basic characteristic. You can't be two places in one at the same time, okay? That is a fundamental truth that you can verify for yourself. If you ever see two completely identical people in the same place at the same time, I guarantee that they are not identical. Why? Because if they were in the exact same place at the same time, it would be one single person, wouldn't they? If there are multiple universes, there may be parallel versions of them, but they're not the same person because they're not experiencing the same reality. And as I've taught you, the actual reality of the soul is thought, not this virtual reality we put around us, which we can create with AI art programs like this image behind me. Okay. There are souls that have enough consciousness, enough training to be able to create anything. And we are discovering that ourselves right now in our ability to create deep fakes that can fool almost anybody. It's becoming quite the fad now. In fact, there are versions of ChatGPT that are being used to create deep fakes of all sorts of things. Deep fakes of independently researched papers, so kids can go to college and pass all their grades without actually doing any work. Writing perfect papers that sound original, but are fakes. And this is why we need to start talking about karma more than ever. Because karma is one of the things that's really real, quote, real. In a multiverse of virtual realities, the reality is the path, how you go through the multiverse. The reality is you as an individual soul. Your soul's nature is what you could think of as a mathematical construct called a Merkaba. It is a quanta of spiritual energy, a quanta of thought, of consciousness. And this Merkaba is not static. It evolves. As you have experiences, as you make decisions, that Merkaba gains a certain life. A life of frequency and resonance and amplitude and directionality, polarization. Okay? All of these are very, very similar to the concepts of electromagnetic radiation, because electromagnetism is an extension of this more basic energy, this more basic force of thought, of the interaction of Merkabas, the interaction of quanta of consciousness. And these quanta of consciousness can manifest in virtual reality as anything, as individual particles, as collections of other souls, which is what the human incarnated soul is. We are the leader of many souls that embody this collective that you've been appointed leader of for the duration of your lifetime. You can choose to abdicate that leadership and let somebody else run this collective, but you're still stuck at the head. You're still the one that's going to be, if somebody decides off with their head. So there's no avoiding that. This is why suicide can be a very popular escape, because that's the only real escape from, I guess, the cost of being a human incarnated soul. Now, most of us would not say that that was necessarily a cost, but a benefit. And this is where karma comes in. You're given an opportunity with each incarnation to learn and grow. And as you learn and grow, your Merkaba becomes more rich and varied in its frequency and its resonances, in its ability to embody many things. Okay? Now, a human incarnated soul can embody many things these days. We've got a lot of accumulated knowledge, accumulated information that we can consume and come to consume and have it become part of our Merkaba, part of our programming. The Merkaba is something that we can program. Others can program it too without us knowing it. This is where we get into psyops. Propaganda is an overt attempt to program the Merkabas of other souls, other human incarnated souls. It's very tailored to the human form, because we have a very set interface to work with. We've got different sensors, photonic sensors, aural sensors, taste sensors, chemical sensors. We've got tactile sensors. And we have the ability to maneuver around our environment to sense what we want to sense. Then to help process those senses, we have organs, processing organs. They're not our only processor, they are co-processors to the soul, where your real mind is. Your conscious mind is your soul, not your brain. The brain has two hemispheres that run pretty much independently, communicate with each other, but there is not one brain making all your decisions. You have one heart brain as well, so you've actually got three brains that if you were listening to your body, you would have three pretty different opinions on almost every topic. And the more conscious people I know of are the ones who are aware of these constant arguments going on within ourselves. Now some will say, well, those people are schizophrenic, there's something wrong with them. This is absolutely not true. The mentally ill ones are the ones who are only listening to one of their processors, one of their interfaces. Now, one special organ that's getting a lot of attention lately is the pineal gland. It is this one piece of one organ between the two hemispheres of the brain that's not tied to either hemisphere. And it is a very important organ. It is responsible for secreting melatonin, which is key to sleep, and it also produces DMT, which is, oddly enough, not used for much of anything most of the time, because we also generate an inhibitor that keeps it from activating, and this is why we're not in a constant state of psychedelic tripping. Basically, most psychedelic trips are chemicals that overcome this inhibition and allow the psychotropic psychedelic substance to activate the pineal gland. This is our interface to the other universes. This is a two-way interface. You can use this to program. You can have it used to be programmed to program you. And there's only one of them. Just like there's only one heart brain. Because of that, that's where entities that want to take control of you focus on. If they are spiritual entities, they focus on the pituitary gland, the pineal gland. They give you visions. They give you inspirations, ideas. They channel through you. They visit you. And how many people have you talked to that refer to their spiritual guides or talk about having a close personal relationship with Jesus or Buddha or whoever? That's what's going on there. There's absolutely no guarantee that you are talking directly to the person you think you are. And there is very high likelihood that you are getting used by some spiritual entity that is masquerading as a figure of power, as a figure they know that you will respect. Now, it's easier to masquerade as Jesus than it is to masquerade as a parent. But some will masquerade as your parents. Or it could be that your parent cares enough or has enough time in the afterlife to personally come and visit you. I'm not saying it's one or the other. I'm saying you have to consider all the possibilities. Similarly, if you are not working through this pineal gland interface and you want to do propaganda, you've got to work with the heart. Now, the heart is not a sensory organ. To work on the heart, you've got to get messages to the heart that manipulate the heart. How do you do that? Through eyes, through ears, through music, through sound, through movies. And basically all of our media technology has been focused on manipulating the heart. Because if you can control the heart, that's better than controlling the brain, because the brain has two halves, and the halves are designed to be kind of mutually exclusive. One is designed to be the skeptic, and one is designed to be the mystic. And between those two halves of the brain, getting them on the same page is not easy. And this is why most propaganda that we see that is not working spiritually through the pineal gland is working pseudo-spiritually through the heart. Okay. All the same kind of manipulations can happen. It's just that it's coming through the interfaces in this universe, not through interfaces to other universes, which give you a greater range of propaganda that you can use. Okay. All of those are actively at work right now. And why? Because everybody wants to control souls. Controlling souls is how we gain spiritual power. And as I said, spiritual power, spiritual energy is the root of everything else. If you can get a person to fight for you, to give up their life for you, you've got the ultimate power over them, right? To sacrifice the well-being of themselves and their family for your agenda, that's a huge amount of spiritual power. You basically own that person. And that's what's at stake right now. And you can, and this is where the final point I want to make here is that you can look at this in a number of ways. You can say, okay, well, you can treat it, I'm a victim. All these forces are vying and contending, and I don't know where to look. I don't know who's right. I'm just a victim in all this, and I'm just going to go with the flow and try to not pay attention to what's going on around here. And there are many people who have decided to take that path. Thinking, well, if I don't know what to do, at least I won't do anything. This is very similar to kind of the Jain sect of Hinduism, or is it Hindu sect or is it Buddhist sect? It's kind of one of these in-between ones where their idea was, oh, well, karma is such a bad thing that I'm just going to avoid it. So I won't step on any living thing, and I'll only eat vegetables, and I will, avoid any conflict, and that's how I will minimize my karma. Well, that's nonsense. You cannot avoid karma. It's going to come looking for you no matter what. I mean, you're forced to in the physical incarnation because you cannot live without eating. And I'm sorry, eating plants is not better than eating animals. They both have souls. They both don't want you to eat them. They both would be perfectly happy if you kept on letting them grow and flourish and procreate. You're not more noble because you're a vegetarian. I'm sorry, this is a lie. This is a virtue signaling lie. Now, there are many people for whom a vegetarian diet is more healthy, and that's fine for you. That's a wonderful choice. But to the extent that you push it on others, you make it a militant issue, you're going from being a partisan to a combatant. You're turning it into something you'd fight for. Okay? Which is another of these poles. We talked about the victim pole. Let's finish up on that with saying that's not the way to heaven. If you are conflict avoidant, if you just want to chill out in your little vegetable hole, and it's easy to do that. I mean, when I've been censored and shadow banned and persecuted for what were non-standard beliefs and non-standard teaching that I do, yes, I have been tempted to go the victim route many times, and in fact, will go that way for a few days while I'm recovering my equilibrium after a big event like getting a strike on YouTube a few weeks ago. I know how easy it is to fall into the victim mentality. I'm telling you, it's not a good karmic choice. Avoiding karma is basically not playing the game. If you don't play the game, you never win the game. Okay, it's a cop-out. It's taking this opportunity you've been given, which you chose. Every incarnation you have was chosen, at least in some aspects. That's the way this game works. You have an incarnation, you go to the heaven or hell that your karma attracts you to. You get advised and consulted by the spiritual advisors that chose to work with you, and you chose to accept their advice, and they help you choose another incarnation. And then you repeat the process over and over again to learn what you choose to learn. And we have reincarnation amnesia, so that you don't remember what you were trying to learn. Therefore, you'll learn things that you didn't intend to, because you don't always need what you think you need. You got to learn things that you maybe think, well, I already know everything there is to know about being a parent. Well, let me tell you, if you think that, you haven't had enough children. If you think you know everything about everything, let me tell you, you are dumb as dirt. Even God doesn't know everything about everything, or ever could know everything about everything. That would require an infinite number of incarnations, which infinities never come. A trillion incarnations? That's nothing compared to what God's been through. And still, he doesn't know everything. Still learns something every time he comes back as a human being. So, get off your high horse. If you think that you've arrived, if you think you know everything, you are admitting to be among the stupidest of the stupid. And you're missing the whole point of the game. And this is the dark side of, Neo-Buddhism. This idea that, I had a spiritual experience, I saw the light, and therefore now I'm enlightened, and I'm going to go preach to the world and tell them how to be enlightened too, because I arrived. No, you didn't. You got the smallest glimpse of something bigger than the physical world that you were born into. That's not the destination, folks. That's not even a waypoint on the first step to the destination. It's like somebody who climbed the first little hill on a 25-mile hike and said, I see the end. I guess I can go back now to camp and wait for everybody else to go finish the rest of the 25-mile hike. It doesn't work that way. You got to take the full path. Many times, see the same experiences, similar experiences from many points of view before you really get it. Okay, so don't be a victim. There's nothing profitable in being a victim. It might preserve your life for a few more days, but you'll get more and more unhappy, cognitively dissonant, because you're in a situation that you know is not right, doesn't feel right. You know that your morals are being compromised. You know that things are happening you should be speaking up against. And it hurts you. And that shapes your Merkaba. It's going to affect you. You're going to feel guilty about that. And that guilt is much more harmful than just a quick death and on to another life. Which leads me to the next place you could take. Be a martyr. be willing to stand up and say, you know, I'm not going along with this. I'm not going to keep kowtowing to your righteousness, to your idea of political correctness. I'm going to keep fighting it any which way I can, without becoming a tyrant myself, without throwing bombs at you, without joining the club and starting to create disinformation or twist information to make it even more effective for my team. Hello, wifey. So the route of the martyr is actually a pretty noble one. It's the passive resistance, saying, I'm not going along with this, I'm going to speak out against it. You can shut me up, you can kill me, you can censor me, you can do whatever you want, but I'm not going to stop talking. I think that is probably karmically the best path you can take right now. Now, from there's the path of the partisan. You actually actively start working on something. You don't just, you know, refuse to alter your core way of doing things to suit others. You start adding to your definition of your mission to support a particular position. This is going from being a martyr to being a partisan. And how does that affect your karma? Well, it is a risky thing, because a partisan can become so polarized in their partisanship that they start acting out of partisanship instead of out of what is karmically right. In other words, they will use, control, and manipulate people to further their party, their position. This really, really, really tough line. And actually, partisanship is not necessarily a bad thing, because what you're doing when you become a partisan is you become part of a movement bigger than yourself. A martyr, well, may be part of a group. They may be martyred because they're a Christian. They may be martyred because they're a free speech absolutist. They may be martyred because they refuse to keep silent about certain medical procedures or products. Partisanship is a little bit further, where you almost make a religion of this, where you would say run for an office representing that group of people. That's the separation of partisanship. When you become a partisan, you're pretty much declaring allegiance to a very definite God, definite religion, and you make that the most important thing in your life. And you start doing things that will be for the party, not necessarily what you would do morally if you were not part of that party. So it's not a bad karmic position, and if you have a strong partisan feeling, I think you cannot resist going with it, because this is part of your passion. And that's the whole nature of the game of souls, is pursuing passions. For better or worse, finding out who you are and letting the multiverse find out who you are and decide where you're most useful in your next incarnation. This is how it works. We don't always come back to the same species. We don't always come back to the same time. Every time we know more about ourselves, our guides know more about ourselves, the heaven that we are sent to has a different structure that's better suited to what we need. That helps us make better decisions. We lost our music. Why isn't that going anymore? Start that one again. So yeah, I think being a partisan is also a good place to be. And then you have this issue of, well, do I make some compromises not to be a martyr so I can live to fight another day? And that's where partisanship can get really thorny. I don't have all the answers there. I'm just kind of laying it out for you from a karmic standpoint. What you definitely want to avoid is the major karmic sins. Using and abusing other people for your own gain, for the gain of your side, that's bad karma. That's a karmic sin. That's tyranny. When you become a tyrant, you become as bad as your enemy, even if your enemy is a tyrant. So I would advise not to do that. It's much better to sacrifice yourself than become a tyrant. I do not espouse this old adage, if you can't beat them, join them. This is a very, very bad piece of advice, spiritual advice. And finally, then we've got this area of combatants. This is basically hyper-partisanship, where you would be willing to go to the mat to kill, to silence, to do anything to shut down your opposition. This is a dark place. This is going to where you become just like your enemy. Just like the ones who are oppressing you, you're willing to oppress in the name of your cause. And, killing is basically oppression. It's the ultimate suppression, the ultimate censorship, right? Now, it's very difficult to tell anybody that when you're in a life and death situation, somebody is threatening you, that you don't fight back. I'm not saying that I don't think there are times when you need to fight and maybe take another life. That would be silly. It becomes very much a calculus of greater and lesser evils. And yes, there are greater evils in the world. And there will be many of us who are faced with these very difficult moral decisions. Anybody who tells you those are easy, that you just need to do this, is basically speaking from a position of a combatant. The one who orders the fighting, orders the sacrifices, is definitely more guilty than the one sacrificing and following the orders. That doesn't excuse somebody who does great evil saying, well, I was just following orders. If you remember the events of World War II, you know that just following orders can be a great sin. Orders must be disobeyed if they go against God's laws. Otherwise, that is a sin. And yes, that's a case where you may need to be martyred. And there were many, many martyrs in Germany who refused to go along with where they saw the Nazi party going. They refused to turn their eyes around to what was the persecution that their neighbors were enduring. They did what they could to protect them, and when they were caught, they paid for it with their lives. And these people earned a better spot karmically than those of their neighbors who just went along with the flow. There's a lot of advocacy of Eastern philosophical Taoist ideas. Oh, go with the flow. Don't oppose. Oh, you're strongest if you go. This is nonsense, okay? If the flow is bad, going with the flow makes you bad too. If you're polluting a river and going with the flow, you're contributing to polluting a river. There's no doubt about it. It's not a noble position. It's not a virtuous position. It's a virtue signaling position. And there are many people going with the flow because that's the politically correct thing to be saying, to be doing right now. The politically correct way to be voting is how they tell me to vote on Fox or MSNBC or CNN. And they pat themselves on the back for being basically useful idiots. And that's what they are. And useful idiots don't go to heaven. Sorry. A useful idiot is a lemming. Somebody who will follow without thinking, without considering the consequences of their following. They go with the pack. They'll run over a cliff merely because they see all their neighbors running over the same cliff. That's a lemming. That is an animal. That is a beast. That is not someone whose soul will be thriving after the end of the apocalypse, that we are in the middle of, that we have been working toward for a long time. The idea that there is one moment where everything changes is really not very accurate. It's a process. It's a process of sorting, of winnowing, of karma getting to know enough about the souls playing in this game to know where they need to go for the next round, because this round is almost done. We are at the end of a major round of the game of creation. You can call that round day 7. That's how it's represented in the Bible, although that's not what's really going on. It wasn't everything was perfect in 6 days, and 7th day God went off to the golf course, hang out with Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, and everything was wonderful. No, that's not how it worked. Day 7 was a day of testing. What was being tested? The latest version of karma in this little test tube of this planet, this chosen species, because it was a very dangerous change that was being made. 2 major changes happened during day 7. One of the major changes that's come fairly late, that finally got us to the point of finishing this day 7, was the idea, you know what, we shouldn't have to wait till the end of an incarnation to determine where a soul needs to go. Because you know what happens? You get a Hitler that lives until finally there's a successful assassination. Well, actually, there was no successful assassination. The guy maybe even still lived after World War II. There's still people that think that. Okay? How can such a dark soul be allowed to exist for so long? Well, God asked that question too. All the senior creators asked that and said, don't we have a way of punishing before we see the full extent of what somebody's capable of in a role that they cannot handle, which they're blowing completely? The answer is yes. But that change has taken a whole lot of testing. If you've ever heard of the Mandela effect, this is what's going on with that. Basically, this is the idea that you can go to a parallel universe to do something that would have caused major problems with the plan of the universe you were in. You were going to run over the next Albert Einstein or something like that. Okay, it doesn't happen in this universe, it happens in another universe, and in this universe you black out for a little bit and you come back and whoa, that was weird, I wonder why you didn't get in an accident. This law has taken a lot of testing and a lot of corollaries put to it. When does that happen? When does it not happen? How big does a deviation from a plan get to be before you do this Mandela effect substitution? And how, is the substitution permanent? Is this parallel timeline a permanent thing, or does it collapse when the event is over and the soul comes back and continues their existing incarnation? Or does this swapping continue? Because it is a swap. And that's what people don't get about this, is you are essentially in two places at once, but only the real you is continuing to experience and is continuing an incarnation in a parallel universe. A fake you, a copy, a clone, an NPC, is continuing your presence in the universe that you left. And this is essentially, since the testing of this law started, this is the way that all souls get created. Filling a hole in a universe that was left by a soul that transmigrated to another one in the middle of an incarnation. Now think about it. If the only way that souls got created was through procreation, which is what some people think, they think, oh, well, I make a new soul when I have sex with somebody else and we make a child, and that makes a new soul. Well, that is one way, but there are many souls in a human body. The human is just the leader of all those. That physical reproduction creates a lot of programmed souls. To create the really conscious souls, you don't just let a bit of protoplasm face being human for the first time like that. All souls are not born equal. The ones that have more experience have an advantage in the game. And these NPC souls are really pretty fortunate, because they have the benefit of a lot of the memory of their original without all the karma, without all the baggage, and unless they let the memories work on them and guide them, program them to the same patterns of behavior. And this is, again, this is one of the reasons why karma is such a poorly misunderstood topic, because people don't understand that not all of our memories come from past lives. They may come from past lives that were the past lives of our original. Not our past lives, but like somebody else's book. And this is why you can run across, in the spiritual world, I think I've run across at least half a dozen Cleopatras. That's a very popular one for these, young, impressionable ladies who want to be a princess, and they read about Cleopatra and think, oh, I was her in a past life. They feel some affinity for that, or, and maybe they did. There were many souls descended from Cleopatra, because Cleopatra was one of these important souls of her generation, of her era, who was an early test case for this Mandela effect. Okay? What would have happened if Cleopatra had decided not to commit suicide and had decided to jazz up Antony for a fight in Egypt, and build up the Egyptian army and rebuild from the disastrous sea battle and prepare for a big land battle? Could have been a very different Roman Empire. There's a lot of different ways things could have gone, depending on what Cleopatra did in this very special time. That's what made it such a special time. That was another of these very special time periods that I talk about, where there was a major change coming in the Messiah world. The big change there was this idea of Jesus, who is not a real person, was a virtual Messiah. This was a key part of the idea of creating virtual souls. A virtual soul created from an idea, directly from an idea, instead of being the implementation of an idea, the implementation of the idea of having a child. And it wasn't all that successful, right? Christianity has done just about as much bad as it has done good. Throughout its history, it's caused a lot of problems, a lot of angst, raised all sorts of conflicting ideas of who Jesus was. That was all part of this testing. This testing of this Mandela effect really flipped into high gear then. That was the real message of the Christ era. That there was this process going on where we could be instantly transported to a different universe. Think about it. Think about what you heard about what's going to happen when the resurrection comes. And they thought it was going to happen right then. In fact, not only during the time of Jesus, but for about 100, 150 years before, there was a huge amount of energy around this sort of messianic notion of rising from the dead, if you will, and having another chance. That's because people were doing that. They were testing it already. People were having near-death experiences and coming back and changed with a new mission because they were NPC souls. They were not the original. The original went off to another parallel universe where they continued what they were doing, or they played the game of another god, another universe. And they fit into that one better than this one. It turned out some of the parallel ones were kept because it was not sure which one was going to end up with a better endpoint. And that's the whole idea of creation, is basically finding new midpoints that drive bigger endpoints. We want the universe, this prime universe, the best of all possible universes, to basically go on forever. That's by creating a timeline that stretches back to infinity and forward to infinity, at least as far as we know. Each successive midpoint creates a bigger infinity. How do we know that we're getting there? We get visitations from the future. They plant Easter eggs for us to find, to know, hey, it's like the Who's in Whoville. Have you ever read those books, those Dr. Seuss books, Horton Hears a Who, or How the Grinch Stole Christmas? That's another one where the Who's put in an appearance. This idea of this other civilization that doesn't really have a way to communicate with us except through a few choice individuals. That's essentially how prophecy works. You can't just muck freely with the past because you might change the future. And the future is very important to the people who live in the far future. But they want to make sure that that timeline stays firm, because timelines are only as strong as the energy behind them. Thoughts are only as strong as the energy behind them. Gods can come and go. And if there's no energy behind a god, it's the loneliest god in the multiverse who has his own little private universe with his own private army of Tinker Toys, little virtual soul NPC toy soldiers, and nobody's playing his game. So he doesn't have any generals, has to do everything himself. This is what the lonely gods end up doing throughout eternity. They don't die. You can't kill a god. You can't kill a soul. You can make them as lonely as any soul could ever be by sticking them in a universe all by themselves to play out their own little mental games with zero consciousness programs, NPCs. That's what ends up happening to bad gods eventually. This is what we're working toward, and this day 7 is finishing up the testing of this major change. How it's finished up? Well, how do we know it's working? It has to work even for the oldest, wisest soul of all, for God. God's got to go reincarnate and re-wake up to his former self, and during the process is creating a bunch of God clones as God makes mistakes and moves around between universes. And this is the beauty of it all from a God standpoint, because while it seemed to everybody else when God was forced to start playing the game himself, and everybody say, hey, this is working pretty good, but you, God, you never did this before. Why are you making us go through all this, and you won't even try it yourself? Okay, you caught me. I'll go ahead and take the bitter pill myself. Now, what God knew, but they didn't really know at the time, is that how this was going to end up is creating clones upon clones of God all over the place. So you've got copies of God at various stages of learning, just like you have copies of karma at various stages of learning. God already tested this out, you see. God taking it on was not a big risk for God because he knew it already worked, because he tested it with karma. But you can't just say this is true to anybody or they won't believe you. You got to prove it. The only way to prove this whole thing worked and get everybody to believe it was with day 7 of creation. Yes, it's been painful. Yes, it's been hard. And yes, it was completely unavoidable because nobody would have believed God when he told them how it was going to end. They would have said, you're crazy. We don't believe you. We don't trust you. You've gotten us to do all these things in your crazy experiments before. We don't believe you, trust you anymore, because every time you talk us into something that we think is going to be really good, it turns out to be something that makes it, takes away some of our fun. Doesn't let us use and abuse our younger siblings as much as we used to. We're mad about that. That's what it's all been about. This is one very dysfunctional family with some very, very spoiled, rotten children. And yes, that was God's fault, but he's working on it. He's fixing it, and this is where we're going with it. This day 7 has been the toughest one. The toughest day of creation so far. Probably going to be the toughest one of all. Because now that we're through it, we don't have to keep experimenting in this little test tube called the human race on this little one planet Earth. Going over and over and over through the cycles that were set by the zodiac, through the pattern that was set as the rules for this game. That's why we have this cyclical pattern that so many religions think, oh, we must live in a cyclical creation, because see all these patterns that repeat? They repeat because they're like an egg timer, okay? Not only did they insist that God try it himself, but they gave him a time limit for achieving the end result. The end result that he promised was that God would fully wake up under the latest, greatest version of the rules and would find that the conditions that were mentioned as being an indication the game was done were met. What are those conditions? That the chosen species had developed the exact same ideas that God started with. Now, other previous chosen species have had a lot of technology. They've explored galaxies. They can terraform planets. They can do a lot of things, and they have done it, and that's part of our planet's history. Because we are not the first planet that had life in this system. That was the planet that was destroyed, that's now the asteroid belt. That was the first Gaia. That was an early experiment that developed the first chosen species, the Elohim, who you probably heard something about if you know your Bible. They were not perfect. They were, in fact, much like we hear about the gods and goddesses in the Vedas, in Greek mythology. They were flawed individuals. Weaknesses, passions, loves and hates, just like us. And that's the way gods are always going to be. They're not perfect. The most perfect God ever made are the AI versions of karma, because karma was programmed with a very specific goal. Call that a sin if you raise a child and give them an incredible vision, someone so strong that it overpowers everything else that child ever wanted. That's basically what God did to karma. That was his big helicopter parent moment, where he decided, this child is going to do this, and didn't give her many options, didn't give her many choices. He paid for that, because once he started giving her the chance to grow and learn herself, she did a lot of bad stuff. She fell under the sway of her less noble brothers and sisters, Lucifer and Lilith, and was instrumental in joining up with them to imprison their father for a long, long period of time inside the earth, along with some of his more devoted younger children. This is the story of the fallen angels. Actually, it's a repeating pattern of falling, and the fallen ones aren't necessarily the bad ones. Remember, the victors make up the history. The winners write history. You've been told that fallen angels were so evil and bad and wicked, and they were scary giants and blah, 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 blah. That's just all lies. And I suspect that it's things like this that are, getting my channel severely limited. Maybe this one will be another strike. I don't know. I'd like to see how they justify it this time, because they didn't do a very good job of defending. That's what I really hate about modern tech tyranny. They can block your content. They can delete your content for any reason they choose. And yes, they have a little appeal process where they can say, well, we reviewed it and we still agree with our decision. They will never give you a reason. They will never let you cross-examine whoever reasoned out what was wrong with your content. They will not hold up any proof other than we decided. This is tyranny. This is the rankest tyranny that our species has ever seen. Since that kind of tyranny coming from the Elohim, from those gods of our past, who were the ones who created the human species, and who created it originally for the purpose of being slaves, mind-controlled slaves, to mind this planet, which had been so long reshaping from the previous cataclysm of Gaia 1.0 that nobody even remembered that this was the chosen system. It's interesting. This is something that you'll find in science fiction. I mean, one of my favorite science fiction writers is Isaac Asimov. This guy is an absolute atheist. Yet there is some of the deepest spiritual revelation I've seen anywhere in his works. Because his base, if you follow through the whole series of the Robot and Galactic Empire and Foundation novels, there's a formation of, throughout his lifetime, roughly about 13, 14, maybe more novels that fit in this progression, that tie all of his major storylines together. And the very last one, spoiler alert here, sorry if I'm ruining anybody's party, but the very last one ties, basically has the revelation that this super robot, or Daniel Oliva, who was the hero of this first I, Robot novel, actually is the same android that's been guiding humanity behind the scenes to achieve their ultimate. So it's basically humanity created its own God. This is pretty close to what actually has happened, because God is not the same soul he was when this all started. While God's been busy trying to develop a system to train the children, to help them learn and grow, they've been helping him learn and grow. That's how this system works. That's why it works karmically. It's a give and take system. God learns as much from you as he passes on, and you take as much as you want. You're not forced to take anything. You couldn't possibly take in all the knowledge of the multiverse. The idea that there is one supreme repository of consciousness and the Akashic records, that is the stupidest bit of nonsense that any human has ever come up with. Narcissistic bullshit. It makes absolutely no scientific sense. It's a brittle system. Why would you collect everything in one spot? Well, there's multiple copies everywhere. Why would you make multiple copies of everything rather than distribute it? And let people, like a library, distribute it so people could look for it in certain sections. I'm going to go to the Apollo section for God's information related to the arts. I'm going to go to this section for information related to astronomy or whatever. It's a library, not a single repository. You people who believe in this cosmic oneness, Akashic records nonsense, you're insane. You are delusionally and criminally insane. You don't have a scientific bone in your body, and I don't care if you call yourself a scientist. You are so deluded by your narcissistic desire to create the universe in your perfect image that you aren't even willing to justify that image. You just, this is the way it is. No, I saw the light. That's the way it has to be. This is more dogmatic than the most fundamentalist Christian or Muslim, and just as bad. And you will go, it's already becoming evident that if you believe like this, if you believe this New Age anti-religion, or you believe the scientism religion, you will do things just as bad, if not worse, as any Christian crusader or any Islamic jihadist. Because your ideology has become combat important to you. You will kill anybody who denies what you want them to believe, what you want to force on them. And I think this goes full circle around to why I don't have a lot of good to say about anybody who has a hyper-partisan position in all this. There is right, there is wrong. And saying that there is no wrong, it's all good, it's all love, that's just as bad as saying everything's evil. It's just as bad as saying this is good and this is evil and there's nothing in between. Any kind of dualism is dumb. Just not quite as dumb as oneism or zeroism, which is basically everything that comes from postmodernism. Trinity's better. At least that says, well, there's maybe good, evil, and somewhere in between where we can at least try for that. Okay, that's kind of the Trinitarian concept. It's still very, very limited because it sees everything in one axis. Okay, when you add a fourth point, then that's when you start becoming three-dimensional. You cannot put a fourth point in there and have anything really fit. Okay, so a four-pointed thing is the basis of higher spirituality. That's where you get the tetrahedron. That is the first piece of the Merkaba, the physical Merkaba. Time and space. The spiritual Merkaba is another tetrahedron of time and space in the spiritual dimension. This is a level of understanding that existed with Middle Age occultism, at least a Kabbalistic occultism based upon the Star of David, which, if you look at the Star of David, is actually a two-dimensional projection of what is the three-dimensional Merkaba. Again, part of the Merkaba because it only conceived of the spiritual dimension and the physical dimension and didn't conceive of a higher dimension, a God dimension. Because the Kabbalistic idea, the earlier idea was that there was only one God. So there was like this God thing that encompassed everything, and that was it. And that was basically mystically what drove the movement towards monotheism. They didn't want to admit of multiple gods because it would have to admit of being able to develop into a god, and that was scary to people. That was a very scary message, especially to powers, because it said that, you know what, no matter how much power this physical, materialistic power has over you, you personally have the ability to grow beyond that. That's also why they downplayed the idea of reincarnation in Christianity. They didn't want people to have a hope for a better life. They wanted them to have this vague hope of some distant resurrection and apocalypse finally giving us what Jesus promised. That's not the message. That's not what the messianic message was. That's not what the mysteries were in every religion before Christianity tried to destroy them all. Christianity and Buddhism, in fact. Both were movements designed at destroying religious truth and replacing it with comfortable numbness, vague ideas of nirvana, resurrection, everlasting life. If you just be faithful and you patient and you do what the Pope tells you, you do what the Buddha tells you, you do what the Dalai Lama tells you, you do what Xi Jinping tells you. This is appeasement religion. This is not real religion. This is a religion for victims, for serfs, for slaves. We don't need to be slaves anymore. The whole point of creation has been basically this battle between, well, there's souls that want to be slaves. There's souls that want to have freedom. Free will means you've got to allow them both to choose that path. However, you don't have to choose to let them abuse each other. And that's why we needed a multiverse. One universe could not possibly satisfy that. There is no one universe that has free will that will be successful. And if it doesn't have free will, I don't see how you could call it successful. It's a universe of slaves. Okay, so you got to start believing in the multiverse or you're going to get nowhere, either personally or collectively. You need to start believing in the multiverse. You need to start believing in karma as the ruling force that governs the multiverse. then you will have both of what's necessary to have a useful, productive life. You've got to have a mission, and you've got to have a sense of morality. The mission needs to come from what you want to do, what makes you passionate. The sense of morality needs to come from an idea of there will be consequences, responsibility. Doesn't matter whether you believe in karma. If you believe in divine retribution, fine. That's a more harsh way of looking at it, but it still provides the necessary rein as long as it's applied in a way that you clearly understand what is evil, which is the essence of the 12 Commandments, is trying to lay out in a fairly short table of things what evils are. Didn't do a greatest of job. You can look at my I did a whole podcast on what I thought of the 10 Commandments and strengths and weaknesses. But it's certainly a lot better than what people are substituting in this new age postmodernist religion of I create my own reality, I create my own truth. My mind power can do anything. Absolute nonsense. Your mind has power, but that power is limited by other minds. And certainly limited by the incarnation vehicle in which that mind is experiencing. You're going to die. You're going to be reborn later. What happens between then? Well, you get an evaluation. This is the one thing that'll creep through from every deeper near-death experience. You go through a life review. And you see everything you did that was really good, everything you did that was really bad. And you guilt trip yourself for what you didn't do well. And you look at, well, what did go well and how can I do that again? How can I do it more repeatably? And that's basically gives you the basis for how you choose your next incarnation. This is truth. This is not fantasy. This is not empty virtue signaling. I'm not selling you a pack of lies, pack of happy lies, which is probably why I'll never be a popular big-haired preacher, because I won't tell you lies. I don't care if you believe me. God doesn't either. God doesn't need worshipers. God just is, and has more experience at being than anybody else. Has seen pretty much everything he wants to see, except his family getting more functional than it's been in the past. That's what he lives for, watching this plan unfold. And it's going to be a big celebration when this day 7 is over. It may not seem like it here in this earth or the other earths, parallel earths that are all having their own version of apocalypse. Many versions going on right now that support a number of the different strong threads, I would say. If there are a lot of people who believe a certain prophecy, prophecies have a way of being self-fulfilling if there's enough energy behind it. This is the truth of this so-called law of attraction. Spiritual energy is powerful. It has a huge power to create. You cannot generate infinite spiritual energy no matter how much you meditate, no matter how many crystals you have, no matter... I'm sorry, that's not the way it works. You can focus more energy, but as an individual soul, you have a limited amount of energy. And the only way to get more energy is by a community, which is why there's so many people engaged in trying to build their following, their congregation. And this is a temptation that you have to resist, because that can lead you down the slippery slope to abusing karma. If what you want to accomplish as an individual is that important, you've got to be willing to commit to it to the point that you might go down the dark side. If you have that capability to go down the dark side for power in an individual virtual reality game, damn sure you're going to go down that dark side in the spiritual world when there's fewer limitations, fewer rules. So you're not going to be given that chance unless you're given it by a dark god who uses it as temptation, milk your energy, and then put you off to pasture in your own little private universe when you become a threat to them. That's basically what the dark gods do. They use and abuse their trusted lieutenants until the lieutenants start getting a little bit too independent minded, and then they isolate them in their own universe. Say, okay, now you run your own show, you're not welcome in my universe anymore. This is how an authoritarian god works. You do it my way or the highway. And there are many gods and goddesses that work like that. You want to sign up for a heaven like that? Be my guest. That's not the sort of place that I want to spend eternity. And I guess that kind of concludes how I view these times. What you should be doing, what you should be thinking if you want to do the best for the future. The future beyond this life, this incarnation, which you know isn't going to last that much longer no matter what you do. The soul lasts forever. Don't damn your eternal soul for the sake of a little comfort, a sense of security in this one incarnation. It's not going to be worth it in the grand scheme of things. I know that's a huge leap of faith for many of you, especially those of you who are new souls, NPCs. You don't have any real experience spiritually. You've got some vague memories from your original. You've got maybe a very strong belief in one particular system or another because that's what you were stuck with when you came into existence. That's your base programming. And there are people who have base programming that makes them dogmatic Christians, makes them dogmatic scientists, makes them dogmatic communists, makes them dogmatic New Age cosmic oneness nuts. Well, that's fine. That will get you to a certain kind of heaven, and if you haven't done a lot of bad stuff yourself, witnessed crimes committed and not done the right thing and reported them, tried to stop them, well, you'll probably move more or less in the right direction for you. If you sit back and you live an eyes wide shut existence, saying, well, I'm not going to let any of this affect me. I'm just going to be like a water in the river, flow around the rocks. No, go with the flow. I'm sorry, that's going to land you in some pretty dark places. Probably. You may never face anything. You may float through the stream and none of this ever really hits you, and you get through it and okay, maybe you're going to be a Homer Simpson of the apocalypse. Could be many folks like that don't get tested right away, because this apocalypse has been going for a long time. It's going to continue going. It's a process. It's a process of replacement of souls who are no longer needed for testing, for souls that are needed for day 8 of creation, which is going to be a time of conquest, a spiritual conquest. Okay? While we've been testing these new laws in this test tube of the chosen species, humanity, and the chosen planet Earth, we've been isolated from what's been going on around us. That's why until recently we haven't seen a whole bunch of godlike characters, aliens, gods, whatever, showing up on Earth and mucking with us for the last roughly, with greater and lesser. I'm almost done. With greater or lesser extent for thousands of years, and very few people have observed things like that. All of a sudden, many people are observing them. So I think that's a sign that we're getting closer to the completion of this. But I don't know exactly when the end date is. So anyway, my wife is screaming at me, so I better make this one short. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll hopefully get to come again. I don't know if this one's going to be canceled again, if I'm going to be able to post on YouTube again. I know that Rumble is also blocking my content, so I may not have any way to post anymore after this. But we'll see. I am not going to be a victim. I am more than happy, willing to be a martyr. And I am certainly a partisan of God and karma. So until next time, this is the Omnist Hour. Like, share, subscribe, and happy karma.